Welcome to another episode of Band Director Bootcamp, the podcast with productivity and wellness tips for busy band directors. I'm your host, Lesley Moffat, and I'm really grateful to be sharing this platform with you. We know you don't have lots of time to watch lengthy professional development webinars, so we bring you 20-minute tidbits with takeaways you can use to amplify your impact and not your workload. Look, if you've ever felt like your band program would completely unravel if you took a sick day, stepped away for the weekend, or just decided to prioritize your own well-being, then today's episode's for you. We're going to talk about how to build a culture that doesn't depend entirely on you. You're going to learn how to create clear standards, intentional systems, and a strong identity that can help your program thrive while also giving you permission to reclaim time for yourself, your family, and the activities that make you feel more than just a band director. This is what I needed years ago when I was having a really hard time physically and mentally and thinking, I'm a high school band director, so the world revolves around everything I'm doing. So maybe the fact that I'm so much older than you is why you didn't have this out sooner, I suppose. But today's guest is Robert Sanchez. He's a veteran band director who's got 20 years of experience building programs from the ground up, revitalizing struggling programs, and helping students become part of something they genuinely want to become part of. Outside music ed, Robert's a second degree black belt, former world champion in martial arts, a distance runner, youth volleyball coach, and leader of a men's fitness and leadership community. His perspective is refreshing because he believes that the principles used to build a successful band program are the same principles that build a healthy, sustainable life. And he's 110% right. Oh my gosh. I've seen his videos on not TikTok, Facebook. He's the guy sitting in the car talking, the burned out band director, if you will. And he's here with us like in person today. So, hey, Robert Sanchez, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Lesley. I appreciate it. That was quite the introduction.
Well, yeah, you've been you bring a lot to the table, not just like of things that are hard and difficult, but you come with some solutions. And like you said when we were talking before recording this, you found a lot of things not to do, but not always solutions yet. But maybe you can warn some people with, hey, here's some other things I've learned maybe not to do. So we're at different stages of our careers here, but I wish see you're like how many years? 20 years or so teaching?
I think
And
I think I'm in like 22 or 23. I stopped counting because there's as many in front of me as behind me. So
well, see, I was in your like 30 something, early 30s of my teaching career when I fell apart because I didn't have strategies. I didn't even think about these things because it was bad, bad, bad. I was, thought that was so important, and my own personal and physical well-being went right down the toilet. And I'm not the only one. And when I read your stuff about all of the things you do physically and the martial arts and all of that, because that's a big piece of my first book that I wrote about is the importance of movement and moving our bodies, just like lubricating the slides and the oil on the valves and all those things. It's all connected. And I'm like, oh, that's a, that's a huge part of what you do too outside of school. So you see the connection between all this. And so I want to talk to you about some of the different things that you brought up. One being white-knuckling, what that's like. And I was fascinated with that concept. So let's start right there because I think everybody's going to recognize themselves in this.
sure. So I was actually engaged with my men's fitness group, and we all have nicknames, and mine, of course, being a music teacher, is Spit Valve. Go figure that. I don't play brass, but that's what it was between that or Ralph Macchio, and they thought Ralph Macchio sounded cool. But one of the other guys' nickname is called HODL, which is a Bitcoin thing, but it stands for Hold On for Dear Life. And I remember when I heard him describe that, I just kind of thought that really describes what a lot of us do in this profession because we all know the things that we have to do. We know the things that we have to get done, but sometimes it's just like a runaway train and we're just a passenger. In fact, that's what I said to my staff always, when we get to our last marching band show and they're going out onto the field and I'll give drum majors tempos, things like that. But for the most part, it's out of our hands. And I say we're just passengers now. Hold on for dear life. So I think the concept of white knuckling kind of comes from that. And the crazier it gets, the the more you have to hold on.
Well, because we're all control freaks, aren't we? I mean, I'm speaking.
Absolutely.
So how do you let that go? Just tell me
Um,
that. Solve all my
I
problems.
I don't. I don't let it go. Every time I give up a piece of control, it bothers me. Um, I guess I'll give you an example, just a small one, but uniforms at my most recent job, mother and daughter that were running the uniform room, but the mother kept having conflicts, and so the daughter would just do it. The daughter was one of my students, and she was a sophomore, a junior, and she was doing a great job managing the uniform room. I said, "Why don't you find a couple more people to help you?" So she did, and it ended up her training her successors. And unlike other leadership positions that were auditioned, the uniform manager was hand selected, and it got to the point where they did the job better than I could do it.
Hmm.
So I think maybe that's how I let go. Is I find a kid that's better than me at something that we need done. Another example might be for some of us social media. I know how to do it all better than I did then now, obviously, but my band had a pretty good post presence on Instagram and Facebook back in the day, and that was all student run, and that was better than I was able to do it. So um, I think just you're never going to give up control or give up the feeling of control, but maybe some of them can just be better than you at certain things. I mean, why do we hire a color guard instructor? Because they're better than me at color guard. So if I hire a professional, I let them do what they do.
It's interesting because later, I was going to talk about it later, but you talk about leaving a program or being gone from a program and it having be okay when it's not in your
Hmm.
care. That must not have just been real intuitive for you if you were white knuckling. How did you get to the point where you've rationalized that, hey, sometimes I'll be away from the program or whatever?
Well, this is probably 6 years ago now. I broke my right foot, and I live about an hour away from my school district, and so I was off. I was on workers' comp, disability, and I was not allowed to have contact with my sub beyond leaving them plans. Now this was after marching season, but it was the prep to start concert band and jazz band and all those things. And I had an outstanding junior student leader who's now probably graduating. We should catch up with her, but will be a band director and a darn good one. And I was able to have some contact with some of my students, and so they would sort of help me funnel to the sub. But eventually that kind of stopped, and I just had to step back and let go and accept, as my one of my college band directors used to say, it's going to be what it's going to be. And I was fortunate when I came back from that 4 week hiatus, and that probably, maybe for some of the mothers out there, that doesn't sound as crazy. But most of us dads are not lucky enough to have, that kind of time off unless we prioritized it, which the younger generation does. I give them a lot of respect for that. But I came back 4 weeks later, and my band was better than when I left it, and that was on the student leaders that made it happen. I had a solid sub. She was not a band first person, more of a general music person, but listened to the students in a similar way that I did, but also maintained the proper relationship with them, that they were able to push forward. She had students do a lot of the conducting and things like that she wasn't as good at. Um, so that really taught me a lot about letting go certain things. When I was a younger director, yeah, you had your breakdown in year 35. I had it in year 3. So, I went back to New York, where I'm from, for a week, and my staff ran it. And again, I came back, and they were better than when I had left. Back then, I said, "Oh man, they must have really not needed me." But as a more grown up person, I realized it was because of systems that I had put in place and culture that I had put in place that it was able to do that.
And that's ultimately, we all want to create that, I think, is that kind of culture. I remember I've had 14 major surgeries, and so I was absent a lot from school. And then I've had 3 babies and done the maternity leaves and all of that. And every time being gone and planning for all of that, and then feeling like your hands are off, whether or not they're going to follow it. And then it causes anxiety and stuff. And that's pretty hard. That was really hard for me. To stay away. I knew I had to, but at the same time, it was like, oh, what am I going to go back to? Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was what it was. But the longer I taught, the better the systems were. So when I was out, um, like you said, it was the kids. It's because that ownership, right?
Mhm.
They have that intrinsic ownership. They want it for themselves, not to make anybody, yeah, like just for the teacher. And I think that's a huge shout out to you. When you've just said twice, when I came back, the band was better. That just says a lot about your love for them and the fact that you, as long as they're learning, um, you're good. I
Well, the
just,
first time I was just going to say the first time I didn't understand that. I came back, they were better, and I was just sort of befuddled. The I'm not going to say I expected it the second time, surprised by it. I was grateful for it. Um, but there was no negative. The first time is maybe a little negative, like, oh man, I suck that much that they got better without me. But the second time it was like, all right, yeah, those are my people.
yeah, that's what you want. You don't want to have to be gone. That's ultimately where we get, right? So back to how can we avoid, being out for so long? If I had taken better care of my own personal health all those years, I wouldn't have been out for those major surgeries in a lot of cases, but I didn't have the tools to do that. So you've built, I mean, the whole martial arts thing and all of the things that you've done, you've made a priority to keep yourself healthy and stuff. And I read in one of the things you said about identity over outcomes, and you mentioned that culture and identity are built the same way, whether you're doing directing a marching band, training for a marathon, or earning your black belt. So, talk to us about that interconnection and what you learn and the overlap.
Well, I think the first thing is, and I know a lot of band people will relate to this concept. I teach band, but band is really just a conduit for uh, you could say I teach life. I teach people how to be humans. I For my son, I call it the human lessons. But and this was one of those things that comes from sort of the Dr. Tim, or as I mentioned before we started recording here, Scott Lang, some of those great speakers in the band space that I've had the pleasure of meeting and working with, where they talk about building better people, and you'll end up with a better program because better people want to do that. Um, but what I started to do is not judge how I was doing in that based on the trophies or the scores or the superiors, which is very difficult to do when you're younger and you feel like everybody's judging you as a director. Especially other directors. We are the worst at judging each other for sure. And so the the instant when I broke my foot and came back, that was a higher level of reflection of that success, of the fact that I had been successful in creating a culture and having those kids identify with that culture more so than going to the state festival would have been, because that's the day-to-day process that we endure and that we go through. And so when that day-to-day is aligned with your values, who you are, what you're trying to do, then you can avoid some of that burnout. And I say some because there's a lot of other areas, but our primary focus as educators is the students in the room. And you can build from there and then hopefully navigate the other obstacles that'll come your way, which a lot of my content talks about too.
Yeah. Well, I have uh uh sorry, brain fart. And you we just started summer break here, and my brain is totally out here. Wellness. I wanted to talk about wellness and not being
Sure.
separate from the job because I'm super impressed with all the things you do. Why do you make wellness for yourself a priority, and how do you fit it in? And why do you think other teachers are so hesitant or unable to make that commitment?
Well, first off, I visit my doctor on schedule, and he does blood work and he takes my blood pressure, um, and I've worked with therapists and things like that. So all of the standard physical and mental health approaches have been a part of my life since I was young. So I know, for example, some people have a stigma with working with therapists. I think it's like having another brain and not having to bear it on yourself. But um, for me mainly, this is something I tell students when they tell me they want to be band directors. I say, great. Once you make your hobby your job, you need to find a new hobby,
Say that
because
louder
other
for the people in the back.
yeah, once you make, because band seems to be for a lot of kids where they fit in the most. They build their identity around their participation in high school band, that they can't see themselves doing something else. So they want to study it. They realize they can make a career out of it. And because of that, their job and their hobby and their passion all overlap. And no matter how good you are at your job, no matter how passionate, it should never be number one in your life. That should be some combination of faith or family or something. It should never be your job. It's just not sustainable for us as people. And like I said, I visited my doctor in about 2019. I was, all the numbers were there. You know how well our meals are sometimes, how healthy they
Mhm.
are. Say that in quotation marks. Well,
Yeah.
my blood numbers were not great. And my wife's like, you got to do something. I started martial arts at that time. And what I found was that a lot of the skills that I had picked up over the years in marching band really translated to martial arts, the memorization, the detail of the movement. You've got to put your hand this way and you've got to put your feet this way. And so that kind of rang a bell. That was very expensive though. And so I've done a little bit less of that. Although there is video of me practicing my sword routine in the band room at my school, and my administrators were aware of this because I did have a parent send an email one time that I was bringing weapons to school. I was like, no, it's ceremonial; it cannot be sharpened. Um, and somebody said, well, if you hit somebody with it, wouldn't that hurt them? I said, if I hit somebody with my sword, you got a bigger problem than the fact that I actually brought a sword to
Yeah.
school. And so I started with an organization called F3. It's a early morning men's workout group. It's national, international, actually. You can find them just about anywhere. And so you probably see in my videos a lot of times I'm wearing an F3 shirt just because it's kind of nondescript um and and so that's what kind of got me into running. And to me, running is as much about mental health as it is about physical. I'm not terribly fast, but I can do it for a while. And again, those of us in the band world, we have a mental toughness to us, a ability to push ourselves beyond, whether it's one more rep or it's 105 degrees and we're doing visual block or something like that. And so again, running really, that one's more individual and personal than the martial arts or coaching, which is something I do for my kids. But I think that wellness can really tie well into band if we give ourselves the time for it. And that kind of goes back to letting go of a little bit of the control. You have to give yourself that time.
Mhm. Well, I got a couple more questions for you, but before we do that, I want to take a moment to shout out our podcast sponsor, the Empowered Music Educator Academy. All right, we are back with Robert Sanchez to finish up here as we're talking about all things burnout or not burnout and just some stuff back here. But I was interested to see that you've recently had made a transition into teaching elementary. Did I get that right? To turn
You
to
did, yeah.
Yeah. So see, I did the same thing. I went from high school after 35 years of high school. I was like, well, it's time. So I'm doing middle school now. And for me, that was the best thing I could have done at that point in my career. What was it like for you? Why'd you make the decision? Are you glad you made it?
Um, I'm not a fan of the job, to be honest with you. This is what I tell people. I said, as a band director, I worked a lot harder in the evenings and weekends than an elementary teacher. But as an elementary teacher, I am working a lot harder during the day. I had spent a lot of time as part of my martial arts journey working with a lot of the young kids. I have my kids are 9 and 13 now, but they were obviously younger at one point. So I actually really do like the kids at that age, individually and in small groups. When you put them all in a classroom together, and I'm at a dual language school and I do not speak the other language, which is Spanish, I can understand enough. I let them think I know more than I do, you know, but it's tough. It drains my capacity a little bit more than I would like. Um, but there were reasons to leave. I'm still in the same district, but there were reasons to leave the high school program. And, unfortunately, those reasons kind of came to fruition after I left, scheduling issues and things like that. So I do consider this a transition. It's not a permanent solution. I won't stay in elementary music, whether it's, um, back into high school in some capacity or doing middle school. I'm not opposed to the revisiting the schedule of the high school, but these are prime years for my kids. And one of the things I'll tell people is the best thing I did for my career was to have kids because it helped me to see things through the parent perspective, but it also moved band much further down on my priority list. And so you mentioned coaching volleyball. I do that for both of my kids. Coach my son in a couple different situations. I coach my daughter's club. So it's, there's a lot of things going on there with that. But I would like to probably get back into working with older people or even adults at some point.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna wrap things up, but if for the like a band director who's listening right now, who's like
Mm-hmm.
really exhausted and overwhelmed, what would be like if they're the control freak like I used to be, like a lot of us are, what would you say is one thing they could do this week to burn out a little bit less?
Well, hopefully it's summer for most of them, so don't check their email.
Oh,
Um,
that's okay. Even if it's not summer when this comes out,
sure.
weekend. Let's pretend weekends. Take that. There's a
Well,
first step.
I think there's kind of a philosophy, and I give it both to my students, and I use it for both myself, and it's just band. Nobody dies if I make a mistake. Nobody dies if you play at it. And I say that because my wife works in cardiology, and somebody might die if she messes up. So
Mm.
with my job, nobody dies if we can't hit that set perfectly. And so nobody's going to die if I don't check my email over the weekend. Nobody's going to die if I give it 24 hours. And it sounds kind of goofy, but I know it's helped some students put it in perspective, but it's helped me. In terms of a tactical thing, there's two things I would advise people to do because I know a lot of us have trouble with recruitment and retention, and I think that people focus on retention first and look for kids in your program that are quiet, that are on the fringes, as I call them, and find ways to bring those fringe kids in by making them feel important, giving them the uniform girl was a fringe
Mm.
kid. She became a core member of the program, and those kids will oftentimes become better performers or not, but they will be positive contributors. They'll pad your numbers.
The-
And the kind of the second thing sort of along those lines is sit down and make a list of everything that happens on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis in your program that kids can do, that responsibilities that they either physical things they can do like setting up the stage for a concert, or things they can manage like social media, uniform, whatever, and start working on ways to integrate maybe those fringe kids, because a lot of times they're fringe not because they're bad or they have issues, but because they have other priorities in their life. And if you can find a way to bring those interests into the band, you not only enhance the band, but you make that more part of their identity. So make a list of all the things in your program that happen, and then make a little check or something next to things that you think kids might be able to handle, because they're a lot more capable. Kids are brilliant. They can do so many things. Yes, there's a lot of problems with social media and stuff like that, but when you see our best kids, they're just as great as the best kids 25, 30 years ago. Uh, they get messed up along the way, but we're not usually the ones that do that. We're usually the ones that build them up and lift them up. So make a list of things that you can do.
Make the list and then let it go once you
Let
know,
it go.
to quote that famous Disney song, let it go. Right. So that was hard for me. I was way older. You're way smarter than I am because you're figuring this out at about half the age I was. Way to go. You're going to have a long, healthy career in front of you. Congrats. Thanks for being here today. Really appreciate it. That is a wrap on this episode of Band Director Boot Camp. Thank you so much to Robert Sanchez for being here today and for all of you out there who keep showing up to teach music every day. Remember, success in music education isn't just about what happens on the podium. It's about taking care of yourself and setting up systems that work for you. Thanks for listening and keep making a difference in kids' lives through the magic of music education.